Welcome everybody to today's segment 1 class. We're going to do an 8-part series here on exploring the phasal relationship of Mars and Pluto. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kim. Welcome everybody.
Thanks, Leroy. And yes, hello everyone. Welcome to our new series on Mars, Pluto through the 8 phases. Today we're going to start with Mars, Pluto in new phase, and this is our February 2020 class. Before we get started, whoops, let me get my little clicker working. Before we get started, that good old little housekeeping slide for you. You'll have these links afterwards if you want to go to specific places with our materials on our website. Just in case you haven't heard this, our YouTube channel was hacked at the beginning of the last Mercury retrograde in November. As we start the next Mercury retrograde since then, we are really energizing that those materials are going to show up through this Mercury retrograde. We have heard from YouTube. They do have everything. We're in the queue, but they cannot give us any timeline on when they will actually get to all our materials and post everything back up like we had it before. You'll be first to know once we get everything back up. And so I just want to show the screen of the cycle of phases and aspects without anything on it. And this was first developed by Dane Rudier. There may have been other astrologers that came before, but he really was the first one to popularize it when he did his book called The Lunation Cycle. And he went through the 8 phases of the sun and the moon, somewhat similar to how we verbalize it in the skies today with the sun and moon. However, Jeffrey Green, who followed a lot of Dane Rudier's writings, then took it one step further and said every planet is in a phasal relationship to every other planet, whether there is an aspect between them or not. And so he added on to a little bit of this, and I then kind of formalized it in a computerized world when I ran his class or his school for 6 years, and brought it forth this way right here that you see right now. Let's just start out with determining aspects to planets. In evolutionary astrology, we take the faster moving planet counterclockwise from the slower moving planet. And so to show you how we're doing this, I'm really trying to practice with my laser pointer. I'm going to do the laser pointer today, and you guys can give me feedback on how you think this works. And so, for instance, if we look at Mercury and Pluto right here, Pluto's the slower moving planet. We'd start with Pluto and we'd move counterclockwise around the circle until we come to Mercury. Mercury is a balsamic conjunction to Pluto. If we compare Pluto and Venus, again, Pluto's slower moving. We would start with Pluto and we would go just a little bit over 10 degrees, about 11 degrees to find Venus. Venus is new phase to Pluto. Now, something that I've shifted from in Jeffrey's original teachings, and I first heard of this from Laura Nalbandian, and her family actually had the bookstore in Seattle that Jeffrey taught at for 20 years or so. I now compare the personal planets, which are Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, to the Sun. And I then compare the Sun to the outer planets. And so the shift is, rather than comparing outer planets to Sun, I'm doing it just the opposite. I came about this from doing the forecasting podcasts, which I have done for 20 years. I started out once upon a time writing a monthly forecast, and then moved into the audio forecast, which we now do as a new moon, full moon. And it just made sense to me from this geocentric perspective. And so in that case, if we then look at the sun, for me, Saturn is the slower moving planet. And we start with Saturn. And again, we go counterclockwise all the way around this circle till we come to the sun. And the sun is balsamic phase to Saturn. You have free choice. You can continue to work with this, or you can go back to Jeffrey's original and compare every planet to the sun. It's whatever feels most resonant for you. Now, in determining aspects to the nodal axis, when I first took over Jeffrey's school, it was back in the early computer days, haha. And there was another evolutionary astrologer who went through, at the time, I want to say maybe 3 years of message boards with Jeffrey doing Q&A with students. And I had asked, do we compare the nodes to the planets, or do we compare the planets to the nodes? And so she did all the legwork for me, and we saw that in the message board, approximately 70% of the time, Jeffrey would compare the nodes to the planet. 30% of the time, he did the opposite. And so we pretty much, many of us in the world of Jeffrey Wolf Green Evolutionary Astrology, adopted the rule of comparing the nodes to the planets. Now, Jeffrey's original teachings, he always said, because the nodal axis, the nodes mean motion, is reversing through the zodiac or retrograde. That is the direction we have to take them when we are determining aspects and when we are determining aspects with the forecasting nodes. So in this case, if we would look at the North Node and Uranus here, we would start with Uranus, and if you follow this outer circle and go all the way around in a clockwise fashion, reversing through the signs, the North Node is making a balsamic conjunction to Uranus. If we start with Uranus and follow this inner circle right here and go to the South Node, it is making a gibbous opposition to Uranus. If that South Node was 19 degrees Sag and 9 minutes, it would be exact. If this South Node was 18 degrees Sag, it would be a full phase opposition. And so this is how we compare aspects with the nodal axis to any planet in the chart. Any questions? You guys are always welcome to type them into the Q&A panel. Leroy will answer for me, and if we need to discuss it, he will always interrupt me and ask the questions. Now, I will say that once we get our YouTube channel back up, the first year I switched to doing webinars, I did 5 classes on the cycle of phases and aspects and how to do the math for it. I will refer you to those for future reference or going back to get a little more detail on if you're a beginner and want to work with it. And so, in general, when we work with Pluto as representative of the soul, and by the way, these are not beginning Sigma 1 classes. One more time, that's what I started over doing back in 2014 when I switched over to webinars with PowerPoint slides. So this series is going to assume you recognize Pluto represents the soul, that you know the Pluto formula and its variations. when we look at Pluto as representative of the evolution of the soul, there are basically 4 types of evolution that the soul will undertake. And these can be combined in various different ways. The first 2 are what's called non-cataclysmic. One, we can produce or create a situation in which we form a relationship to something that we perceive we need. Example, we can create a new relationship with a lover or a friend, or we could decide to go to college. We could even get a job. There are all kinds of relationships. 10 years ago, I decided to take master gardening classes and become a master gardener volunteer. So I created a relationship with the state university that did the educations in that. We can produce or create a situation in which we have become aware of a new capacity or capability that has been within our soul, but it's been latent or dormant. It's been either subconscious or unconscious. A caveat to this is that many times this new capacity or capability will require perseverance and will to actualize. To give you an example of this, when I took my Master Gardener training, it was in the middle of Leroy and I purchasing an acre and a half in the hills of western South Dakota. And not only did I do the training, but I realized that I had a natural green thumb. It's something my family jokes about. Just give it to Kimmy and she will make it grow. It wasn't anything that I necessarily learned on the farm I was raised on because I grew up in cornfields and I'm, mm, not growing corn. But so in other words, there was just something inside me that's already been a gardener before, past lives. And so I brought it into consciousness again and actualized it. Now, these 2 possibilities can easily be combined, and these 2 possibilities can be combined with what we will call the cataclysmic evolution. 2 examples are the 2 possibilities here. One, we can produce or create emotional shocks in which some behavioral pattern or life situation is forcefully removed. Common examples: a divorce, losing your job, having a health emergency, and being declared you have a disease or a cancer. Literally, the most major one, though, is death. Another possibility is we can produce or create situations in our lives in which we become aware of either internal or external sources of stagnation or limitation blocking further growth. And what happens? It will create a crisis in varying degrees. Let's go back and use divorce as an example. In the first possibility, the emotional shock would be created if the partner comes up to us and says, I want a divorce. And it rocks our world. In the second cataclysmic possibility, it would be us recognizing on an internal basis that we don't want to be in this relationship or marriage anymore. And we are the one who says to the partner, I want a divorce. Just one example, these 2 possibilities can be combined with each other. And again, they can be combined with the non-cataclysmic possibilities as well. Now, another thing when it comes to evolution in general, especially evolution with Pluto the soul, is we have three reactions to the evolutionary impulse. First possibility, we can resist the karmic or evolutionary requirements altogether. We just put our feet in the sand, we stay stuck in the mud, and the soul says, I'm not changing. This tends to be a rare reaction. Second possibility is we can go for it in a totally non-resistant way. The universe is presenting some ideas of change to me, and I am just going to jump in and go for it 100% and radically change however necessary. This also tends to be a rare reaction. The third possibility is by far the most common reaction for all of us. And this is true regardless of whether you're consensus, individuating, or spirituating state of consciousness for your soul. Typically, with the evolutionary impulse, we'll be willing to change in some ways, yet resist changing in other ways due to fear of the unknown. And it can also be that security of wanting everything to be safe, secure. Now, Mars is the subjective consciousness at an egocentric level, or egoic level, that brings awareness of the desire nature existing within the soul. And this includes both the separating and returning desires, the desire to separate from that which created us. I exist, I am, I'm here. And the desire to return to that which created us, the desire to know source. So Mars is also known as then the leading edge of the desire nature. And I realized I took a lunch break and didn't come back. I thought I was done. Something else that I wanted to say here is that Mars will always make the deep unconscious desires of the soul, represented by Pluto, conscious. For many of us, those deepest desires within the soul, i.e. Pluto, they are unconscious. And one of the most beautiful gifts of astrology, and especially evolutionary astrology, is that when we look at our chart by the sign Pluto was born in, by the house Pluto was born in, it helps us in making those unconscious desires more conscious. And then, as they are made conscious, they are activated on by Mars. And Mars, from that egocentric perspective, thinks it's its desire. I want to go for it. And so then we start to use that phasal relationship of Mars and Pluto in determining exactly how we are going to activate those deep unconscious desires. And so I want to point out that for those of you who have Pluto Volume 2, and I specifically, let me put this in future classes, but you got Pluto Volume 2, at least the old paper copy. I think it was specifically page 209. 209, page 210. Jeffrey was known to, bring things through on a very psychic level, but he did not always follow through and pay attention to the logic of something sometimes. And I think, and I have first editions of Pluto Volume 1 and Pluto Volume 2, and I'm thinking that the astrologers who edited his books didn't know to say, what about this? Maybe we should shift it. And I'm specifically referring to his original teachings, in which he would go back and forth over what constituted a primary lifetime and what constituted a secondary, or what he would call a subsidiary lifetime. And having followed his teachings now for 36 years and teaching his school and conversations back in the day, this is the formula or procedures of what he was speaking about with the Mars Pluto and what represents a primary lifetime. And so generally it can take 8, sometimes 9 primary lifetimes for a soul to work through the lessons of the main karmic dynamic and evolutionary intent of Pluto, as represented by a specific natal Pluto house. So what constitutes those primary lifetimes? They are when Mars and Pluto are in one of the 8 specific 45-degree aspects to each other. And here is Kim Marie coming in right here. When it is finishing up the phase and getting ready to go into one of those 45-degree aspects, it's applying to that 45-degree aspect. I have a tendency to use a little bit shorter orb in calling it a primary lifetime. And we'll have an example of this today. If it's new phase and just moving into a new particular phase, any of the 8, I use a few more degrees in that separating aspect in calling it a primary lifetime. This is just me through 3+ decades of working with Mars, Pluto, and primary, secondary lifetimes. Now, in between those 8, maybe 9 primary lifetimes, there can be any number of secondary lifetimes working through the same phasal lessons, what we would call indirectly. And this is because the soul has the free choice and the free will to take as long as it desires or to go as fast as it desires in healing its karma and evolving. Now, here specifically are the primary lifetime examples. Again, you would start with Pluto and follow Mars counterclockwise, and the angle would be 0, give or take a few degrees here, okay? 45, 90, 135, 180, 225, 270, 315, 360. Each one of these aspects are going to be divisible by the harmonics of 8. There will be a 45-degree multiple between Mars and Pluto. Secondary lifetimes, maybe Mars and Pluto, maybe Mars is 30 degrees beyond Pluto, maybe it's the 120 waxing trine or 240 waning trine. In other words, there's an aspect between Mars and Pluto, but it is a non-45-degree aspect. And of course, we can also have a secondary lifetime when Mars and Pluto are in a phasal relationship, a particular phase with each other, and there's maybe no specific aspect between them. And this is because, again, with the foundation of the cycle of phases and aspects, all Mars-Pluto angles have a specific phasal relationship. You do not get out of the phasal relationship. It's there. And they may or may not have a specific aspect between each other. Now, for those of you who have been studying evolutionary astrology for a while, or even new beginners, substitute any 2 planets here. Every planet is in a phasal relationship to every other planet. And this is where evolutionary astrology will differ from traditional astrology when they say, well, you don't have any aspects to your moon, which is my situation. And yet my moon has a phasal relationship to every other planet. And I actually went through a time period where probably my first few years of astrology studies, and I was learning this, and traditional astrology said, I don't have any aspects to my moon. I even had an astrologer in a reading tell me that. And then I thought, wait a minute, nope. I found the cycle of phases and aspects from the beginning of my astrological studies. It's why I love teaching it. It's why I'm so grateful for it. And I went, oh, wait a minute. And I literally took time to study my moon in relationship to every other planet in the chart without any specific aspects. So don't be fooled, because every planet relates to every other planet, and together it's you. Now, question. Do souls go through lifetimes in consecutive Mars-Pluto phasal relationship order via a specific house? In other words, do we go through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of Pluto in the third house with Mars new phase or crescent, then first quarter, then gibbous, then full phase? Answer, who knows? Maybe, maybe not. It wasn't anything that I ever heard asked or answered by Jeffrey in his original teachings. I have a tendency to think most likely it's not. We're too multifaceted. However, our souls do end up living a primary lifetime in each of the 8 45-degree primary aspects of Mars-Pluto in a specific house. Even if you skip Pluto lifetimes moving around to different houses. And we will do that through all 12 houses. And maybe we will do it even more than once. I've heard Jeffrey Green joke back in the day, there's a reason we have an unconsciousness. If we knew how many prior lives we would have, we'd all go crazy. It takes a real expansion in consciousness, that expanding through the evolutionary states, to be able to access, let alone hold all your lifetimes in consciousness. And yet that is exactly what we do on the evolutionary path to becoming an avatar. Jesus, Buddha, Yogananda, etc. Okay, so here is a visual, all right? Just recapping here. And of course, we put Pluto in at the 0-degree mark in the natural circle, okay? But in your chart, Pluto's going to be in any one of the 12 houses. The point is that you're going to go from Pluto counterclockwise in your own chart till you get to Mars, and you bring out the specific degrees and see if it's a phasal relationship, if there's a specific aspect, if it's a secondary or primary aspect. And so if Mars is 0 to 5 degrees from Pluto, that is a new phase. Leroy and I are raising a son who has Mars. I think his Mars is minutes shy of 10 degrees beyond Pluto. And so maybe he's had a prior lifetime of that natal Pluto house signature. If Mars is like a semi-sextile or a noville, that's going to be a subsidiary lifetime. If Mars has moved 45 degrees beyond Pluto, few degrees on this side, few degrees on that side, then it becomes that primary lifetime. So you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And sometimes I wonder if there isn't a 9 really finishing it all up. For any of you who have Mars balsamic Pluto by conjunction in your chart, I think it might be those 9 primary lifetimes to really bring it all to completion. But you get the visual on what we are talking about. And so what this will give us is the deeper understanding of how long a soul has been working upon those natal Pluto archetypes by a specific house. And again, this is specific to the house, not the sign. All right. Now, it doesn't mean we can't go through the signs with Mars, Pluto in their specific 45-degree angles, but I've not heard that in Jeffrey's original teachings. It was always specific to a house. Yes, you add in the nodal axis to have a complete understanding of the karmic complex in any given lifetime. I think that the nodal axis also shifts along with Mars as we look at these specific Pluto houses as well. All right, so we're going to go into some specifics. I'm going to just check in here and see if there's any questions or comments from anybody. I have another list for you so that you can understand specifically by the number of degrees to the 8 specific phases. And so let me just stop for a moment and check in with you, Leroy, and see if there's any questions, comments from anybody.
Well, we have a couple comments from the board, kind of talking about their personal chart. Do you want to take those or?
Only if they're new phase. If your Mars is 25 or 45 degrees from your Pluto, yes. If it's a different
Mars at 24 Leo and Pluto at 5 degrees Virgo, second house. Is this a secondary lifetime or a prime or?
Okay, somebody do the math for me. Okay, hold on. I'm going to get a piece of paper here. All right. Hold on. Pluto was what?
5 Virgo in the second house.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's not anything to do with the math. And Mars is 24 Leo. So the way I got that figured here, we're working
24
around.
Leo. Well, I do my math the opposite, and so we've got 6 and 5. Mars is balsamic phase Pluto.
That's a balsamic phase.
It's 11 degrees, and so that math, Pluto at 5 Virgo with Mars at 24 Leo is balsamic phase. Mars is 11 degrees from making a conjunction to Pluto.
So this student and just kind of got, we always look at that circle chart, and of course the planets move counterclockwise, right?
Correct.
Around that chart. So that's probably where this associate kind of got a little off kilter. So that's always a tricky one. That's a
right. We're going to have specifics again. For those of you who are showing up at the class, if you need some help with the math, you can email us at our website, and if you can email the website, it's going to go to Leroy at MediaMonk at evolutionaryastrology.net, or you can email me, Kim Marie, at evolutionaryastrology.net. And while we're waiting for our YouTube channel to come back up, I can send you a specific PDF of a webinar class I did that is focused on all the math, nothing but the math. Okay. Email us if you're confused or a beginner. And again, we'll get that PDF to you to help you with your studies. Any other questions, Leroy?
Nope, you're good to continue.
Okay. All right. So, in regards to the cycle of phases and aspects in general, let's remember that life, or our souls, are always in a continuous state of change and evolution. None of us remain static. If we could, we'd all want to be 25 years old and maybe 40 pounds lighter. And so this continuous state of change or evolution is known through the archetype of Mars, which is similar to Aries in the first house. Mars, Aries, first house is one archetype. And so again, Mars is that leading edge of our desire nature, where the desires are made conscious, we identify them, we instinctively act upon them. So that cycle of phases and aspects from 0 to 360 is a complete cycle of evolution, from birth to growth to bloom to decay and death. Now, I will say to any of you who are a little more intermediate or advanced in your evolutionary astrology studies, you can take that 45 degrees. Astrologers will say from 0 degrees Taurus to 30 degrees Taurus, that's a mini cycle all in itself. You can also extrapolate that from any 45-degree aspect. When you're at the first part of one of the 8 specific phases, that's going to be a little different, new, rather than at the end of any specific 45-degree mark in one of the 8 phases where you're culminating, finishing it up, understanding it. So you can take that kind of understanding of, new to old or beginning to end, and you can do it 0 to 360. You can do it through 30 degrees of a sign. You can do it through a specific house, however many degrees are in that house, and you can do it through the 45 degrees of any of the 8 phases. If you're a beginner to evolutionary astrology, don't be too concerned. You will pick this up as time goes by. The point again is that every planet, including every point in space, is in a phasal relationship to every other planet and point in space. There may or may not be an aspect between them. So as you are just starting on chart interpretation, you always understand an aspect from the phase it exists in. You don't understand 2 planets opposing each other from just new phase. You have to understand it from full phase. And we had many examples of this in previous classes. So any questions, if Leroy can't answer, you can forward them on to me, and I can refer you to specific classes that you can refer back to. So here's that cycle of phases and aspects one more time for you, just in a generic form, so that you can start to really get this. I will point out before we go specific, you will notice that these phases alternate between yang and yin. A yang phase is always energy moving out from the center. A yin phase is always energy moving in towards the center. So many of you are familiar with conjunctions, squares, oppositions, and the last quarter square, first quarter square, last quarter square. Those divide the circle into 4. And those, yeah, all 4 of those aspects, or there are more when you consider applying and separating, they're all shifting us into yang phases. New phase is yang. First quarter phase, yang. Full phase, yang. Last quarter, yang. One of the things that I like to point out to those of you studying evolutionary astrology is that the semi-squares, waxing, waning, and the sesquisquadrates, waxing, waning, are just as valid and active as conjunction, oppositions, and squares. They're all just happening to move energy inward. So if you draw up a little grid on your chart and you see the symbols for all the aspects, if you see the symbol for a semi-square or a sesquisquadrate, you can know right off the bat that that is energy getting ready to turn inward between any 2 planets. So another way of saying this is energy outward wants to initiate, create, experience. Energy inward wants to reflect, understand, integrate. I'm making notes here because I'm going to take this, and as we go through the series, I will take some of these teaching notes and I'll add them on so that these actually will become some PowerPoint slides that you can just refer to generically. Okay? So moving forward, what we're going to work with today is the new phase. And the new phase is 0 to 45 degrees. As we said earlier, it is yang. The key words that we use for it in EA is instinctual emergence. So it is a brand new evolutionary intention to initiate a new relationship between Mars and Pluto. The intent between them is to initiate a new cycle of desires, a new way to be on both a soul, Pluto, and egoic level, Mars. So there's all kinds of brand new desires being born and birthed. The clues will come from the specific sign, generationally, of Pluto and the specific house. Mars may be in the same sign and same house, or it may be that Mars is in the next sign or the next house. It depends relative to each individual chart. What we do know with the new phase in general is that it will create a need to have a diversity of experiences in order to begin manifesting whatever these new intentions, these new desires may be. And as is the case, we will know this also with the sign Aries and the first house. With Mars, there's this tendency to have an action and learn through reaction. This can be extrapolated all the way out to the new Yang phase. Action, reaction, and that's how we create the knowledge to help us understand what we want in regards to the desires emanating within our soul. The new phase is a desire to break free from the past or whatever came before. Now, I will say that past can be represented by that last balsamic phase of Mars Pluto. And when we have Mars Pluto new phase in a specific house, we don't necessarily know what house Mars or even Pluto, especially, was in the last time they were balsamic. Because when Mars Pluto finishes up balsamic and then starts over new again, it can start a brand new cycle in a different house, in a different series of lifetimes in a new house. One more time, may not be chronological. One thing, though, to recognize with new phase is that there is a fear of being absorbed by that past. It's what we know. It can have some security to it. And so it can generate a need for absolute freedom to break free from that past, to start all over again. And this is where that margin anger and frustration will come in if there's any perception that someone or something, circumstances, events are preventing us from having freedom as we want. And yet, because astrology works via polarity, does it by houses, does it by signs, it also does it by the 8 phases. And so the new phase is going to relate to its opposite phase, which is full phase. And if you think of full phase, this is 180 to 225. Just reflect it to the natural zodiac, 30 degrees of Libra, 15 degrees of Scorpio. Others. And so what will happen, even though they're new phase, there's such a desire for freedom to act and do and be and discover all those desires coming from within the soul. Relative to the opposite full phase, we're going to run into people who give us feedback. And they're going to give us necessary feedback to help us learn what desires and actions we want to initiate, and more importantly, follow through with. If we didn't have that opposite phase, that energy moving out from the center will just keep going. It's got to run into something. It can create a tendency to think that others, full phase, know more than us. If we're the soul that has Mars, new phase Pluto, these desires can be new enough that we think everybody else has more experience or knows more. And so not only can we go to that stream of frustration and anger and don't fence me in and give me my freedom, we can also go into that, oh, but maybe I should do what they say because, they've had more experience than me. And so it's going to create in this Mars-Pluto phasal relationship the necessary intent to intuit when to listen to somebody else, that reaction from our actions, and when to go forward with these new desires and actions because it's what we need to do for ourselves. There will be a back and forth here in different circumstances and situations. And because it's new phase, which if we relate to the natural zodiac, 30 degrees of Aries to 15 degrees of Taurus, it's going to be between us and others. The new phase might naturally bring in the relationship situations. Now, specific to the aspect with the conjunctions, EA uses wide orbs. And so we'll look at Mars beyond Pluto, 8, 9, up to 10 degrees is still being in conjunction. As it starts to get beyond 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees, it's going to go from being primary lifetime to maybe a secondary lifetime. Remember we said, or I said, that our sun has Mars, I think it's just shy of 10 degrees from Pluto. And so we suspect that there's been at least one previous lifetime with Mars in a closer conjunction to Pluto. And so with that conjunction, it is the literal uniting so that they can birth a new evolutionary purpose and cycle. And it's going to happen very instinctively. The closer Mars is to a new phase conjunction to Pluto, the less egocentric awareness there is. The more it just has to be projected out there and acted upon. It's just an instinctive energy, an instinctive desire to act, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what comes back at us. We'll see what the reaction is. And when it's in that new phase conjunction, the feedback may or may not be accepted and integrated. That feedback may or may not be accepted or integrated lasts through that entire 45 degrees of the new phase. The further away Mars gets from Pluto, the more that maybe they're forced to listen or they start considering to listen. When it is at new phase conjunction, random experiences can be initiated. And that what it's doing is it's beginning that self-discovery process related to the desire nature. And this is known by the sign house that Pluto's in, aspects it makes, and then where Mars is at by sign and house. And chances are making, for the most part, the same aspects as Pluto. Well, here's a quick little example for you. Anybody recognize this chart? We used this chart last month. We did a forecasting chart example with Donald Trump's chart. We're not going to do any interpretation today other than I will give a few brief comments. But I want you to know that if we start at Pluto here at 10 degrees Leo, we will go 16 degrees and 44 minutes to get to his Mars at 26 Leo, 46 minutes. So we're beyond that conjunction in new phase. We're almost 17 degrees. We're about a third of the way through new phase. So this is Mars Pluto in a new phase relationship. Relative to Leo, look at me, see me, notice me. How much shall I be Leonian and act out so you notice me? Remember Leo? Yeah, he says Leo wants to be on top of the pyramid and the world revolves around me. If we start to put it into the 12th house, this is where I have had some tendencies to say, you've got to have an observation correlation with the 12th house or Pisces and the last of the 12 archetypes, because the 12th archetype contains all 11 archetypes that came before it. The actor of the zodiac, as we all have a tendency to say. And so it can behave as any of the other houses if it feels so inclined. Now we will, for me, Donald Trump is third consensus. He's figured out the consensus system. He knows how it works. He knows how to manipulate it and use it to his advantage. And so I think, relative to observing him, that with this Mars Pluto new phase in Leo and the 12th house, I think he really does believe in many degrees, in many ways. He's the chosen one. 12th house. I get to play God. I get to do whatever I want. You will do as I say. And if not, you will be removed. You won't exist in my world. 12th house. We could go into many, many, many other things. I just want to give you a brief example of this. Now, again, in January's class, we did a forecasting example of Donald Trump with transits, progressions, and solar arcs. And if you participate in the EA Zoom meetings on their Facebook page or their YouTube page, I did a 2020 forecast for Donald Trump. So if you want more information, I refer you to those places. We will get to the 30-degree mark, which is the harmonics of 12. Dividing 360 by 12 gives you 30 degrees each. This aspect is called the semi-sextile. It exists within the new phase. Here is when that formation of conscious and egocentric identification starts to happen with whatever the new evolutionary desires are. We will find that random actions and experiences start to narrow. Again, we're 2/3 of the way through the first 45 degrees. We're getting reaction from that full phase. We're starting to learn from those random actions and experiences. You know, the example is, how many times does the child put its hand on the hot stove before it no longer does that? I'm not going to take that action anymore. It doesn't lead me anywhere. So the soul begins to sense specific directions that allow for the discovery and realization of what these new evolutionary desires and cycle is all about. This will then move into the next aspect, which is the noville, 40 degrees. It's the harmonics of 9. So we take 360, divide it by 9, and we get 440 degrees. There are 940 degrees in a circle of 360 degrees. And so this starts to begin a gestation process where that conscious and egocentric awareness really starts to gel things together with whatever our new desires are relative to Mars and Pluto. There's still a very subjective growth in actualizing these desires, and we kind of personalize them. This is me. This is who I am. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to create. This is what I'm going to go after. And so the soul starts to become aware of how it's going to move in these new directions. Again, relative to sign, house, aspects of Pluto and Mars. And they become very, very personal in nature. So there's a very, very strong sense of self-discovery. And one more time, narrowing of random experiences continue. It allows us then to discover which desires we really want to activate and move forward with. And finally, this brings us to the new phase side of the semi-square. By now you might figure out the semi-square, the 45-degree marks, there's 8 of them. That's why we call it the harmonics of 8. 360 divided by 8, 45 degrees, pie-shaped segments. When Mars is about 42, 43, 44 degrees from Pluto, it starts to transition from new phase to crescent phase. But when it's less than 45 degrees, the new phase is still stronger. There arises a conflict between desiring more new experiences with our new desires, new phase, and the desire to slow down, to consolidate, to internalize, integrate, manifest what has been experienced so far. We want to start to really put it together from within our soul with regards to what it is that we are desiring. Okay, so this is going to bring us to our volunteer and chart example for today. And I forgot to give Leroy the chart example. And yes, she's okay. Leroy, our volunteer, is Linda. Um, Linda B, and I have 2 Linda B's. And if he gets the wrong one, we'll say, nope, the other Linda.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Do I have the right Linda?
Yes, ma'am, you do.
Oh, there's that southern accent.
Yeah. Hey, y'all. How you doing?
All right. Thank you, sweetie, for showing up. Let me just check in one moment and just see if there's questions, comments before we move into chart example.
Okay.
Thank you. And you can start reading on your screen as I check in with Leroy here.
Nope, looks like all hands are down and ready to roll with Linda.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, sweetie. So, just for sake of recording, I just want everybody to know that your birth data is January 12th, 1969, 9:23 p.m. in Pontiac, Michigan. Your Mars-Pluto angle is 42 degrees and 56 minutes. Oh, let's call it 43 degrees. It's just shy of that crescent phase. So here is her Mars at 25 Virgo, and it's retrograde. And oh, you see, we got some other stuff going on right here.
Mhm.
Now, if we start with Pluto and go to her Mars, Mars shows up then, Porphyry houses, in the 3rd house at about 8 degrees Scorpio. So we have a new phase crescent, no, excuse me, we have a new phase semi-square aspect. So we do
Yes.
have a specific aspect between Mars and Pluto. Let me quickly just read. Volunteer feels that she is for spiritual. She did have some Christian upbringing, metaphysics in her 20s. Family was lower middle class. She has a younger sister and brother. She was very close to her mom until she felt betrayed by her mom. They left dad, and mom returned to him when our volunteer was 14. Dad was an alcoholic, and it really had a huge effect on her. As you can see, that's going to be the near that Saturn opposition. She felt that since then she had a lot of familial alienation that may continue to this day. She is a musician, and she works as a courier as well. She's not had a long-term relationship to date. She's had 2 to 3 very karmic relationships with other females, always being the one rejected. So she feels that she's got some karmic lessons with betrayal and rejection. One of the highlights of her life was achieving a dream of playing with the Indigo Girls. If you guys don't know who they are, I suggest you look them up. I have every single Indigo Girls CD.
And that's part of the reason why I love you.
I think that was one of our connections. And
Yes, one of
so
many.
this volunteer field that feels that at that, that uh, achievement was a real spiritual leap of growth for her. And so it's very easy for me to rattle off. However, because I interact with you on our Facebook group, I I think that you are an excellent evolutionary astrologer.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
going to put you on the spot, sweetie pie.
Wow, that just made me feel very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I mean, you've asked a lot of questions over the years, but you answer your own questions. So I'm gonna let you speak first, and then I'm gonna just fill in. So run.
Well, I feel that new phase, that 40, almost, what is it, 40, you said 44
40,
degrees?
43 degrees.
Yeah, 43 degrees. I definitely feel that Taurian like transition happening with me.
Mm-hmm.
That started around 45 years of age after I had, gone through my self-discovery up to that time. Most of all, moving to Atlanta when I was a young, dreamer at 24, and I thought, well, I'm just going to go do this, and thinking back now, I'm like, oh my God, I would never do that now, you know. Um, but I just had to go out there and do it. Although I had, that full phase was coming in saying, well, I don't know about that. You're just whatever. But just the thought of having any regrets around that, I had a lot of foresight, and I thought, man, if I come to middle age and I don't try this, because I felt such a connection with them from Michigan, being a gay person myself in a small town in the 80s, it was not easy. I knew that I was gay since I was 13, but I didn't tell anyone until I was 18. Um, so when I saw them on VH1 and they were in the mainstream, and they were not out at that time publicly, but I knew. I mean, you knew. I was like, oh my God. And they
Mm-hmm.
gave me permission to live and to be who I am. And I had no choice but to be around it. And so I had to come down here and take my chances. And it took a while, but it did pay off. I ended up on stage with them singing three-part harmony to Galileo. I mean, life just doesn't get better when that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was good. But then after I realized that I was only going to get so far with that, I wanted to be their drummer. But although I was able to sing with them and play with them on stage numerous times, I was never hired as their drummer. And when I realized that was not going to happen, I really started kind of pulling my energy in. I had to grieve that a little bit and understand that it went as far as it could go for reasons I may not understand. But, looking at the Scorpio energy, everyone can't be president every lifetime. Everyone can't be in the, limelight every lifetime. And so even with that sun in the fifth house, I tried, but I feel, I took it as far as I could, and I had to grieve that. But then I realized, maybe I didn't want that as much as I thought, because you have to be gone all the time. You're traveling all the time. And that Taurian energy around that transition into Crescent, I started to feel that. I don't want to be gone all the time. I enjoy being home. I enjoy reflecting on all the self-discovery that I've done up to that point. And so I've changed my mind around that. So I think it happened for the best, and I'm grateful, that it did happen because of all the self-discovery. But I'm ready to, like, hone it in. I don't tour anymore, and I don't travel. I pretty much just do gigs around Atlanta or Tennessee, stuff like that. I still sing with them on occasion, but only in gigs in Atlanta. And I've come to peace with that. I'm good with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, listening to you, the first thing that's popping out at me is with Potpourri houses. Your third house cusp is 7 Scorpio, 56 minutes. Your
Mm.
Mars is 7 Scorpio, 58 minutes. You're only 2 minutes, not degrees, 2 minutes from the second house. And to
Mm.
have that right there in the beginning of the third house, I have a tendency to say sometimes that third house is all about variety, diversity, curiosity, duality. Sometimes that third house is about making a choice.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I'm sensing within you relative to the new phase semi-square from, Pluto to Mars. You've had, probably a few secondary lifetimes of being out there exploring, initiating, doing new things for yourself being an Aries soul, first house Pluto, and B, working with all this karma in relationships, which we'll also discuss. And
Yes.
so this movement of Mars finishing up new phase, getting ready to go into crescent, it really is your soul starting to slow down, consolidate, you know?
That makes a lot, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And, as far as relationships, if anyone on the call has ever watched a VH1 Behind the Music, bands are little mini marriages and they can be just as difficult. And I've had my share of that. I've been in a ton of bands. I haven't just played with the Indigo Girls. I've been in a ton of bands, and in every one, the connection was deep. It felt karmic looking back on it. Things to figure out. Some of them ended nicely, some of them did not. Um, and boy, was that karmic. I mean, that Libra energy, it's music and relationships. And that's literally been my whole life. It's been more, well, I don't want to say more, but it's been an equal influence on me as much as the romantic relationships has.
Hmm. You can look at it from the band intimacy, and you can look at it from the one-on-one intimacy with partners. I'm going to bring in a little more intermediate to advanced EA. Remember, we said that you will reverse or go backwards through the circle when you are looking at comparing the nodes to the planet.
Mhm.
She has Pluto conjunct the south node. But if we start with Pluto, you always start with the planet and you reverse or go clockwise around the circle. This south node is a balsamic conjunction to Pluto.
Mm.
Uranus is new phase to Pluto. The south node is new phase to Uranus. But we've got a mixture of new phase conjunctions and balsamic conjunctions. I'm going to work specifically with the ego of the past. Okay, south node, balsamic conjunction to Pluto. And we can also relate with these other two planets being in Libra. Listening, what I pick up on, okay, is lifetimes, okay, of perhaps um, um, either giving your power away in relationships or compromising on your essence of who you are, Aries soul, in relationships. You're a Pluto Virgo. You're trying
Mm.
to learn how to make the soul adjustments to be in relationship as an ego. It asks the question, were you in relationships as an equal? The first house Pluto or Aries soul energy will say, well, my needs come first. The south node in Libra with two planets in Libra and their retrograde says, am I first or have I put my partners first?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be a mixture of the two. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm wondering, listening, again, here's that observe, correlate. I'm wondering if you have not went through sometimes putting that partner before yourself and therefore needing to experience the rejection,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so that your first house Pluto goes, well, this is me, not somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
the Mars Pluto phase comes in to say, and I have to find my own, one of the words I like to use for Scorpio in the recent past is self-empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Because Scorpio is always wanting to merge with whatever we perceive to be more empowering or powerful than ourselves. Well,
Mm-hmm.
how about self-empowerment?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if the karmic rejections have been there by perhaps some evolutionary necessity to really get you to go, well, who am I versus others? And how do I really integrate me and the desires that satisfy me?
Yeah, you just nailed everything in my head since I was since I was born. Yeah, I feel like my whole life has been about balancing who I am with other people. It's in the forefront of my heart all the time. I've always had a lot of friends. Um, wherever I went, I made friends pretty easily down here through music. I've always had my group, whether it be a band or just friends. I mean, I've been really lucky that way. And it's always in my mind. And I remember, um, let me see, when was this? Right before I discovered EA, I was reflecting about, it just felt kind of weird to me that I hadn't had a long-term relationship yet, even though, of course I wanted one. But it just didn't happen. It hadn't happened yet because of the rejections and blah blah blah. But everything you just said, I had the conscious thought of, now wait a minute, there's a pattern to this. I can see third house. I understand this pattern. This was before I discovered EA.
Mhm,
I was like, this is teaching me how to handle this, because maybe I didn't know who I was in past lives. Maybe I did give myself away too much in the past with all that Virgo energy I've got in my chart, way more than the sun in Capricorn.
mhm,
Virgo is really heavy with me. And that's kind of what I did. I kind of acclimated to the other's needs. I would worry that if I put mine at the forefront, that they would be like, well, this isn't going to work out. And that's kind of what happened every time, but it didn't make me go back and it didn't make me acquiesce. It made me self-empowered. And even though I felt the loss, I would allow myself to have the feelings. But then within
mhm,
6 months to a year, I'm out and I'm doing something else. You know what I mean?
mhm,
So that's exactly what you said, what has gone on my entire lifetime. Who am I in regard to other people? And with Chiron right there on my North Node, it has also, I mean, my primary relationship is with source energy at this point. And I
mhm,
think I mean, it's right there on my North Node. In order for me to have that soulmate spiritualized relationship that I would still like and I'm looking for, um,
mhm,
my first relationship is with source, because source has always been with me no matter what, even through all this.
mhm,
And that's really heavy with me right now. Like it's such a blessing, and I'm grateful for EA for, just mapping out this language for me, because it really changed my life understanding all this. Because I felt it, but I couldn't make as much sense of it as I can now. Just looking at my chart every day, and just kind of reflecting on it, learning more with EA, doing readings, for other people. It's really grounding me and self-empowering me, in who I am as opposed to who another person is, and instilling boundaries and being comfortable with those boundaries and understanding that when I put healthy boundaries up, the people who are supposed to stay will stay,
Mhm.
and that's
Yes,
huge.
yes.
Mhm.
Two things that I just want to point out, just for anybody who may be a little bit newer to EA studies. Whenever a planet is conjunct the south node, there's three possibilities. The first one is relive. Something wasn't learned, finished, accomplished, and so we've got to do it again. The second possibility is fruition. There has been so much prior effort, prior life effort put into the themes relative to planet signs, houses, that it just naturally comes to fruition and expression. Those first two possibilities are more rare. The third possibility is by far the most common, which is a mixture of the two, a mixture of the relive, a mixture of the fruition. The fact that I mean, for most people, who gets to be a musician and, play with I'm going to, for me, A-list, big band out there that people know by name recognition, very few. That could be a fruition example.
Yeah.
The karmic, rejection in the relationships can be the relive example. The second thing that I want to point out for somebody who is newer, while again, we're talking the Mars Pluto new phase, and so we want to think every example is going to be a Mars new phase like Donald Trump, bombasting us with everything. Okay. Please understand that, and this will be true of a Virgo rising, this will be true of a Libra rising. Um, when we start to bring Libra into the first house planets, it can have an effect on all of that Aries me first energy. The Libra planets, me versus you versus me. Oh my gosh, who gets to be on top, who gets to be stronger, who gets to be first. And so that energy starts to go back and forth and back and forth, and it will sometimes temper that first house energy. That is why that observation correlation is so important. Hence some of the things that I was saying earlier with this chart example, that with those two planets, Uranus and Jupiter in Libra, and then that south node there, that I was sensing that perhaps the soul would compromise and acquiesce, and do the Libra less than self a little more than, say, if those same identical planets had some of them in Scorpio, or some of those
Mhm.
planets, in Sag, for example.
Mhm.
So that's part of that
Yeah.
blending that we do.
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. I mean, there's a band that I'm in right now. I play drums, and I've played with her for a long time. And I do feel like I compromise myself a little too much for this person, and I'm trying to figure that out. And because I don't necessarily want to completely just, exit the situation, I'm just trying to put up more boundaries and just kind of let her know what I can and can't do, and just kind of, you know, figure it out as I go without going to extremes. All that's that Libra and Scorpio, which I think I may have done in the past, not this
Mhm.
lifetime, but before, and just kind of, keep it as balanced as possible between me and the other. And so an example of that is I just don't want to go out of town in a van anymore, but I'm happy to play local gigs with you. You know what I'm saying? That's a really good boundary for me.
Yes. Well, with the seventh house, Pluto, polarity, intent, because this comes into the picture with Mars, Pluto, you still are learning this expression of the new desires coming out of your soul. You are still learning all of those desires and how you are going to manifest them through relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to do it from the first house Pluto or Aries soul isolation, which can be what the tendency is. You have these Libra planets coloring that. If these Libra planets were not in the picture, this first house Pluto might be a little more self-contained, might be a little more, nope, don't need no relationships in my life.
Right. Right. Right.
So you're not going to be in isolation with this signature. And Mars is really, really working on finding its own power. And therefore, what sources of power, Scorpio, it really wants to merge with to make the choices that are best for itself in relationships and also on an emotional level. Because
Mm-hmm.
this moon is new phase to this Mars. And so it becomes part of the picture as well with the Mars Pluto new phase semi-sextile aspect.
Yes, definitely. Mm-hmm.
And there can be other things, but again, I'm just trying to always bring us back into that Mars Pluto phase.
Right.
And so by the way, volunteer, do you have any questions for me? Anybody live on the call? Questions for the chart, the volunteer?
I don't have any questions. I'm happy to answer or help answer anyone else's questions if they have any.
Sure. Let's check in with Leroy and see. I have a tendency when I focus so much on trying to teach whatever the subject is that I don't pay attention to the Q&A panel, so I don't get sidetracked. I do my
No.
Scorpio laser focus. What'd you say, Leroy?
You're fine on the board, and thank you. A very, very lucent and nice example for this Mars new phase Pluto. Thank you, Linda.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to be
Sure.
here. I love you
Yep.
guys.
Yep. Hey, diddle back, kiddo. Well, before we close then, the other thing that I will maybe bring into the picture, and this is with your Mars inside the third house.
Okay.
Let me see if I have the names right. I had them this morning. I'm blanking out.
Larry?
Bob and Larry. Yes.
Oh, yes, the infamous Bob and Larry.
So, our volunteer Linda's a city girl. Kim Marie is a farm girl. And we also share a love of four-legged felines. And growing up on a farm, I'm very used to being able to tell a male cat from a female cat. And I was having a conversation with a client on this just this week. It was another client who adopted a cat, uh, gave it a male name, and
Hmm.
found out it was a female.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting when the nodes are in Cancer Capricorn. I love that.
I even put it into the third house energy,
Yeah.
because that third, you know, one of the things, okay, so let's just bring this subject up because we've got a little bit of time. And,
Okay.
and so when we're working with some of the gender issues, we've all heard or we all come across the EA teachings that, you know, when we have Pluto or the nodal axis in Cancer or Capricorn or 4th or 10th, we will sometimes see that there's been gender switching. All right. But when we are working with the gender attractions and we're either attracted to opposite gender or we're attracted to same gender, um, we won't necessarily put those to the 4th, 10th, or the squares 1st, 7th. Jeffrey would sometimes put them with the 3rd, 9
Mm,
and the squares of the 6th, 12th. And there's not a lot of writings on that. And it has to do with some of that mutable modality. Okay.
mhm,
In other words, it's the 3rd archetype in each one of the quadrants.
mhm,
And it's mutable. It's learning to be adaptable. Am I this or am I that? And we can kind of recognize that with that, you know, Gemini energy.
mhm,
I have some theories, okay, that as we are getting to the ending of the Piscean age and we are starting to move into the Aquarian age, and we've had so much patriarchal distortions suppressing natural law 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 years, take your pick, that as we start to see this pendulum swing into the Aquarian age, we're not only going to maybe let go of traditional, well, not let go. We're not going to just see the traditional opposite gender relationships. We got some makeup to do. In other words, that Aquarian age unity and diversity and give me the freedom to be who I want to be, however I want to be. And so I think some of the archetypes of the zodiac are going to start having their shifting where we can still maybe see the gender switches with those cardinal modalities there, but same gender, the whole LBGTQ plus arena is not going to
mhm,
be limited to a few archetypes in the zodiac.
mm.
Linda,
Yeah,
have you
I
looked
see.
at enough charts that you might agree?
Yes, I would agree. And just a little interjection here. Your encouragement around me being an astrologer really helps me because, all that Virgo energy, I'm like, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. You know, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to hurt somebody, but I really need to get the homework from y'all. But that was just a side note. But yes, I've looked at a number of friends and family, well, not so much family, but friends' charts, most of them being in the homosexual arena. And yeah, I see Gemini Sag a lot with very little Cancer Capricorn.
Hmm.
And then, the Virgo Pisces, let's, bring in, the religious shame around all of it for the last, since Christianity was invented.
Hmm.
It's, that's, I think you're right. I think we're going to start seeing those archetypes encompass different sexualities, and there's a different letter, with the LGBTQ plus plus, it's being added every year. And I think it's wonderful because one size does not fit all. And I know a bunch of gay people that don't even like to refer to themselves as I'm gay because that puts them in a box and it eliminates the spectrum because I'm one of the few of my friends that have never been attracted to a man. Um, I'm the anomaly. Most of my
Hmm.
friends have had, it just kind of depends on the person. It depends on your soul. You fall in love with the soul.
Yes.
Um,
And
and
one, go ahead. No, you go first.
So I was just gonna interject one more thing. I just graduated from Georgia State with a psychology degree, and I'm glad I did it. But EA resonates with me way more, and I'm going in that direction. But one thing that I did learn through going through that program is mainstream psychology is really diving into this now, and there's so much research on it and so much new information coming out on it every day that is basically, saying there is nothing wrong with this. This is just as natural as heterosexuality. We're seeing it in science, we're seeing it in research, and there's all this, at least where I live in Decatur, Georgia, it's very, even though it's the South, it's very open-minded, it's very liberal, it's where the Indigo Girls came from. And so it's like, it's just very different from the Midwest where I came from, which is probably why I was drawn here. But such an openness around it more and more every year that is really encouraging and makes me very happy.
When I was back in the late 90s, when Jeffrey and Noel Till, who, by the way, I don't have the exact date, but I did come across that Noel Till finally, or not finally, but Noel Till transitioned into spirit world recently. But when Jeffrey and Noel had, they 97, 99, 2000, they did 3 conferences together in Denver, and I live about 6 hours north of there, and I was still back in my single days. And I went to all 3 of those conferences, and I remember the very first one in 97 and asking Jeffrey the question, well, way before the alphabet soup, okay?
Mhm.
But I remember asking him way back then, well, what's the purpose of homosexuality? And he said, Kim, 2 things. Number 1, it is to learn to love the soul first and the body second. And secondly, it is to learn androgyny.
Oh, I love Jeffrey.
And
Oh my gosh.
and, and then he goes, have you seen pictures of Yogananda? I go, hmm? He goes, well, is he a male or a female when you look at that photo?
Hmm.
And
Wow.
and so, he said that to me way, way back then. And so interestingly enough, I mean, I've been doing astrology charts for the whatever you prefer sexuality community for
Hmm.
probably 20, 25 years. I've
Wow.
been doing it a long, long time. And then I kind of got a little bit of a reputation. And so I started getting referrals, and people would say, well, I heard you'd read our charts, and I'm attracted to a female or I'm attracted to a male. And so,
Hmm.
I'm heterosexual this lifetime, but I've got a ton of planets in Sag. And so to me, I just so appreciate what Jeffrey said to me, way back then. And perhaps it just resonated with maybe what I was kind of pondering for myself. So I just thought, because we had a little bit of time, I wanted to share that with anybody who's live on the call or anybody in the future who may listen to this class.
Hmm.
So,
Yes.
final call, volunteer, comments, questions
Um,
for you?
I don't have any questions, just a lot of gratitude and thankfulness for your teaching. I think you're the best teacher on the planet, Kimmery.
Well, we got a mutual love fest going on, babe.
Yeah. Sorry, all. Just had to get it
All
in
right,
while I've got her on the phone.
all right, get your homework in, all right?
I will. I will.
All right, last call to anybody out there, comments or questions on anything. And many times Leroy is silent. I thank you, volunteer, very much for volunteering your chart, especially as a little bit of a last minute notice. A special shout out to Rosanna, who gave me the idea. I've been pondering what's my next series going to be. Hold on a second here. Got to get my little thing going. And so here are our classes as we go through these 8 phases of Mars Pluto. I want to point out that if you have Mars last quarter phase to Pluto, That is the only class where I still want 2 volunteers. As we go forward the next few months, we're going to try and we're not going to do complete chart analysis. We're going to keep it a little bit short so that we can give 2 different Mars Pluto examples for each class. I also want to point out that due to some of our travel schedules, our class next month will be the second Tuesday. So if you like to attend the classes live, please mark your calendars for next month on the second Tuesday of the month. And then next, I want to point out that we just finished our free Mercury retrograde class. And I don't know for sure how Leroy is posting that or how it's to be accessed. You're welcome to interrupt me if you want, honey. And then I do have a public webinar coming up March 2nd and March 4th for Saturn in Aquarius, 3 months. Yoo-hoo! I hear you. Are you live?
Actually, you know, with the YouTube issue, I used to post it on YouTube. We always post it on iTunes. We have it on the forecast or on the podcast page of the website, obviously, Mercury retrograde in Pisces Aquarius. But I'm also using it as a freebie on, getting some forecasting webinar PDF sold off the forecasting webinars page. So you can purchase your enrollment in Saturn in Aquarius and receive the free Mercury retrograde PDF. You can also purchase the 2020 forecast or the 2 Jupiter webinars that we produced earlier in this year, and all have relevant current video links because I'm using the webinar service as our streaming service now. So as we
At the moment.
measure between getting the full recovery of the YouTube channel, but we always have to move with technology, and so I'm trying to move forward in different ways. So we apologize for the inconvenience, but just know that you can get that PDF and that video link will work, and consider getting that, and then the free Mercury retrograde webinar as well on the forecasting.
And if any of you are not aware of this, I was very, very pleased with my 2020 forecast. I kind of switched it up and did it in chronological order for the year rather than planetary order. So calling 2020 a wild ride, and highly encourage you to visit it because there's a lot of aspects in there for this year with the
and a lot of
Jupiters.
innovation with Saturn and Aquarius. It's a great mix, Saturn and in the sign of Aquarius, but we'll see how that plays out. It's going to be a pretty good 2-3 year transit. So just know that these are the long-term transits we try to focus on in EA, and you get the freebie with the Mercury retrograde in Pisces. So thanks for listening, everybody.
Yep, and again, one more reminder, the March class, Mars Pluto crescent phase, will be the second Tuesday of March. All right, thank you, everyone.